There's a really big question that seems to kind of continually come every time, and that is the 4% rule. Dun, dun, dun.
How many times do we hear that asked to us?
The real question people have is, how do I get that paycheck every 2 weeks? I've worked for 30 years. I'm used to getting that paycheck. How do I create that income stream? The real problem with the 4% rule is it doesn't fit the age test. It's not adaptable. It does have opportunity for growth, but it doesn't ensure that the funds are available.
We didn't have inflation in the 90s like we do right now. That is not taken into account in the 4% rule. So
That's right.
Inflation can have a major detrimental impact on a portfolio in a strategy such as that.
So the 4% rule, you are not destined for success. What other sort of strategies are out there? Welcome to Wealth Strategies Unleashed. I'm Robert Gilliland with Concenture Wealth Management and
Karen Hyder.
Thank you all so much for joining us. As we go through and kind of get into this, before we get started, Karen, let's stick with the tradition.
Dad joke time.
Dad joke, go.
Okay, I have two. I will admit one of them is questionable. Well, I'm worried that you're not going to like the first one, so I've got two ready to go, but back up in play. All right, first one. So it's a little bit different format this time. Did you hear about the ATM that got addicted to money? It suffered from withdrawals. I got a chuckle at least.
Hey, you know what? That one's not as bad as I was looking forward to.
Okay, let's try the second one. Why did the mortgage broker go to art school?
He had interest?
You're close. He wanted to learn how to draw interest. Art.
Art, yeah, well, there's a lot of good art type of
Okay,
jokes.
rate the two. Which one was better?
First, by far.
Wow, I'm shocked that you felt that way.
They were both quality dad jokes.
There we go.
Is what we'll say. So, Karen, we spend a lot of time talking to people about retirement, and they have a lot of questions and things like that.
Yep.
Things people should be thinking about when it comes to creating income streams.
Yeah, this is the perfect time. We're at the beginning of the year. People are thinking about cash flow. I think it's a really good time to dive in, especially for retirees that are looking to turn their portfolio into an income stream. There's a lot of things to be thinking about. So with that, let's just dive right in.
So I think what's very important is to realize there has to be a bit of a paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. When you are in the accumulation phase, when you have money, getting it invested is smart. The real question people have is that, how do I create income? In other words, how do I get that paycheck every 2 weeks? Yeah. I've worked for 30 years. I'm used to getting that paycheck. What do I do? How do I create that income stream? And I actually think that you have to, clearly all starts with a plan. But what you need to do when you're looking at that income stream is, we call it A.G.E, A-G-E, right? Mm-hmm. And that's an acronym. A stands for adaptable. As you're going through and setting up those income streams, it has to be adaptable. The amount of money that you need today may be more or less than tomorrow. There may be something that pops up that you need more money, or an opportunity that you need more money. So it has to be flexible. Mm-hmm. G stands for growth. And you've got to stay ahead of inflation. You want to get the right amount of growth for the risk that you're taking on. But probably the part that is equally as important as those other two is you have to ensure that cash is available when you need it.
Yep.
Right? And so with that, we hear clients come to us a lot. And there is a really big kind of rule of there's a really big question that seems to kind of continually come every time. Mm-hmm. And that is the 4% rule. Yep. Dun, dun, dun.
How many times do we hear that asked to us?
What is the 4% rule?
Yep. So this was a concept that was actually developed back in the 1990s by a financial planner. And this planner looked at a lot of assumptions and basically said, if you were to take 4% of your portfolio on a yearly basis, then you'd be able to withstand withdrawals for a period of about 30 years. So for example, if your portfolio has $1 million, 4% of that means you can take $40,000 a year from your portfolio, and you'll be able to maintain those withdrawals for about 30 years. Now, one key thing in that study that he made was that assumed an allocation of about 50 to 75% in stocks, the rest of it in bonds and cash. So some interesting assumptions.
So if I have $1 million in investment assets, mm-hmm. how much can I get?
You can get $40,000.
And if I have $500,000, how much can I get?
20,000.
That's right.
Testing me on my
4%.
math
That's
today.
Right. No calculator, so all's good. All right. So here's the biggest challenge with the 4% rule. That assumes that the markets always go up. That's a big problem.
Yep.
We're not, even though it actually feels like it's a long ways away, we're not too far away from 2008 and 2009 when the S&P 500 dropped down to 667. We had, 2022? Mm-hmm. We had the market down significantly. Mm-hmm. The real problem with the 4% rule is it doesn't fit the age test. It's not adaptable. You have to fulfill all three. Mm-hmm. It's not adaptable. It does have opportunity for growth, but it doesn't ensure that the funds are available.
Well, because
here's why. If I have that $1 million, I can get today. I take that $40,000 out. But the markets don't go up. And let's say that it drops down to 800,000. Mm-hmm. Now, the most I can take out in the next year is $32,000. Yep. So what do I have to do? I have to adjust my lifestyle. But what do people in reality do? They take the 40,000. Mm-hmm. And if the market is down or the portfolio value is down, you have done irreparable harm.
Yep.
And the only way to solve that harm is to take more risk.
Yes.
Right? That compounds the harm when it happens because even though the last 2 years we haven't experienced it, markets don't always go up.
Well, and to your point, think about the sequence of returns. So if a retiree goes and retires, and the first 5 years of retirement, the market does nothing but produce negative returns in all 5 of those years, well, not only does the retiree have to adjust their spending amount so they can't take $40,000 out every year, their portfolio is declining and they have to be able to adjust their spending to cover that amount. So that just doesn't fit real life with what people expect and want out of their portfolio.
Yeah, and the real thing that I see in our strategy and the way that we go and do it, we really kind of lucked into it, if you will, because we saw clients where they had success, right? Because when you do have that market outcome, your only choice is to stay in there is to adjust your standard of living, and that's very difficult, right? Especially when you go and you get into retirement.
There's 2 other limitations I think about. You may have more in your head, but one is inflation. Look at where inflation's been over the last 3 years. When this planner sat down and created this strategy, we didn't have inflation in the 90s like we do right now. We had a different type of inflation, different rate of inflation. If a retiree goes and retires, say they retired in the COVID years where we had 8-9% inflation, well, that is not taken into account in the 4% rule. So
that's right.
Inflation can have a major detrimental impact on a portfolio in a strategy such as that.
So the 4% rule, you are not destined for success.
Yep.
There are what other sort of strategies are out there that is not the 4% rule?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few I can think of. So one of them specifically is dynamic withdrawals, which sounds like a fancy word, but basically what it's saying is when the market does really well, then in that year you can take more out of your portfolio. And in a year where the market does not do well, where you have negative returns, you adjust the amount that you pull out and you take a smaller dollar amount.
Let's put this through the age test. Is it adaptable?
Well, it's adaptable in that the spending has to adapt, but is it adaptable to the retiree?
Well, so what happens if markets are down, but there's an expense that pops up?
Yep, that is definitely not adaptable to that.
Now, all of a sudden, you've done irreparable harm. Does it allow for opportunities for growth? We'll
Not
give
necessarily, because if
yeah.
the markets are down, you're pulling out while that down period is happening. And then when the markets are up, well, that growth that you just captured, you're taking out in the form of a higher withdrawal that year. So I would argue no.
Again, irreparable harm because the success and the longevity of your portfolio does depend on growth, right? What about does it ensure the funds are there? That's a clear one.
No.
No, right. Because here's the deal. You can adjust your lifestyle. But the number one thing that people tell us is how do I create that paycheck so I don't have to dramatically adjust my lifestyle? And that's the biggest thing, because their lifestyle, that whether it is travel, yeah, that could be modified. But it's the other bills in their other day-to-day life and other goals.
The very scary one we hear from retirees that they're always concerned about is the unknown of healthcare.
Right.
What if they have a big healthcare expense, a big emergency? Some of these strategies do not hold up and allow that flexibility in instances like that.
100%. What's some other?
Yep. So another one is similar to the 4%, a percentage strategy. Maybe it's not 4%. Maybe it's you take the safer approach and you say 3.5%. While that sounds in theory like a safe bet because you're under the known 4% that we just said doesn't always work, I would argue that doesn't work either because it lacks the ability to have flexibility in there.
Well, you know what? 100%. It doesn't pass the age test. Let's just put it right there. Doesn't allow for adaptability, doesn't allow for growth, and it doesn't allow, well, it might allow for growth, but it doesn't ensure that that money is there. And I immediately, as you're describing that, I go back to the period from 2001 till 2011, where the average return over that entire period on the market was less than 2%. So if you're taking that, let's just call it 3% out, you are reducing the portfolio. There's not, people like confidence.
Yep.
The thing that I've noticed is that when people are looking at retirement, they don't want to have to worry about what's coming down the road and where it is. And so far, these strategies haven't done it. What's another one?
Another one is kind of the RMD method. So required minimum distributions is what RMD stands for. But in this strategy, it's basically taking your overall portfolio, so not just retirement accounts, but all accounts, and taking that against your life expectancy. So taking out the amount over your life so that at the end of that time period, your last check bounces.
Excellent. So if we know exactly when we're going to die, financial planning becomes a lot easier, doesn't
Absolutely.
it?
We'd all be great at this.
Here's the other challenge with that problem, or with that solution to the problem, right? If you are a 56-year-old and retiring, you've done a great job savings, and you're going to use this RMD method, the amount that you take out of there is significantly, or the amount that you're living on is significantly less than when you're 65. Here's the thing that people don't necessarily intuitively understand about life expectancy. Every day that you're alive, your life expectancy extends, right? So that means that you're going to take a lot less at the beginning and a lot more at the end. Well, look, you just have worked all this time to be able to enjoy it. Now, one thing I'm going to say is about every single strategy that we've talked about so far, they all work if you have lots of zeros and lots of commas.
Very true.
Okay? So if I have $50 million and I've got a relatively moderate lifestyle, it works. All of them work. But if you are that executive, the quintessential family, right? It doesn't, so far, and that RMD method really doesn't work.
Absolutely. Yep. So the last two that I'll go through quickly because I feel like we start to kind of overlap some of the reasons why these don't work. But one of them is taking inflation-adjusted withdrawals. So maybe you take a percentage, say the 4%, but each year you increase that percentage adjusting for inflation from the year before.
Okay, so is it adaptable? Yep, it is adaptable. But it's not adaptable for those
the unknowns.
Does it allow for growth? Maybe, because it's going to depend on what that percentage of withdrawal is.
Well, it depends what your
market.
growth is. Is your growth high enough over what inflation was? In periods of really high inflation years, are you growing enough in the portfolio to outpace the inflation and not just pull that out in the form of withdrawals?
That's right. And it doesn't ensure that the funds are available.
Absolutely. Last one then is the setting a spending floor and ceiling method. So what that means is creating a minimum and a maximum dollar amount that you'll take out on a year-by-year basis. So basically just setting that window of which you'll take your withdrawals from.
Yeah, here's the challenge with that one without going into, is it adaptable? Yeah, it could be adaptable. Does it allow for growth? Yeah, it could. And does it ensure the funds are there? Answer is no. The challenge with that is you just have to go and think about investor behavior. We just have gone through 2 years of incredible markets. And with 2 years of incredible markets, it's very easy to think that the next year and the next year and the next year are going to be good. But then all of a sudden you bump into an extended period of the markets not being good. And you may end up getting into taking too much out. So that one right there. The other thing is what happens when your lifestyle really adjusts, right? Healthcare costs or weddings or grandkids' college. It doesn't give you that flexibility.
Absolutely.
And so we've talked about all of those. I think that it makes sense to one that we find a lot. And you haven't talked about it. What is it?
Is this where we're talking about the bucket strategy?
Give a very high level, and then I'll explain how we
Yep.
apply
So
it.
this strategy is basically bucketing your funds into a couple buckets. Often what we see is 3 buckets that each have a designated time horizon. So you have a short-term bucket that has your cash flow for a period of years, often 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 years. You've got a middle bucket that's kind of your medium-term funds, call it your years 6 through 10 cash flow needs. And then you've got a bucket designated for long-term growth, for your future more than 10 years of cash flow needs.
Let's dig into this one because this is a strategy that we've seen give people peace of mind and help them maintain their standard of living and grow their wealth. Just remember that the age approach is it has to be adaptable, it has to grow, and you have to ensure that those funds are available when you need it. So for the income. Okay? So the way that we look at this is that we first start off with a plan, understanding what's what and where it is, a true net worth statement. What sort of assets do we have available to create this retirement lifestyle? So then you go in the very beginning, if we think about this from left to right. So the column on the very far left, let's talk about that first. That's your guaranteed lifetime income. Guaranteed lifetime income. Social Security. Yep. Still, if you're over 50, I feel highly confident that Social Security is guaranteed for you. And that is a real dollar amount. Social Security. Pensions.
Yep.
Any sort of annuities that are going to be paying you. That is your lifetime income because all of those are guaranteed. From there, what you do on an inflation adjusted standpoint, look at how much more do you need to make up the difference between your lifestyle expense and your guaranteed income. I'm going to make these numbers simple. So in year 1, you need $100,000 and you have $50,000 worth of guaranteed income. Then what goes into year number 1 in short term is $50,000. Index that for inflation, take into account taxes. And what you do is you set that, I like to call them boxes as opposed to buckets. You set those boxes up for 5 years. So year 1, we know what the difference is between income need and guaranteed income. That goes there. Year 2, same thing, 3, 4, and 5. Now, I think that it's vitally important not to assume any sort of growth rate on that money. You have to be ultra conservative. Things that you invest in there have to have guarantees. So what do you mean by that? Well, we're looking at things like cash, money markets, CDs, bonds, very, very short-term bonds, different things like that we know that we're going to get our income back. That's your living expenses for the next 5 years. You don't have to worry about necessarily what's happening inside of the market every day, next 5 years. But we know that beginning of year 6, we've got to do this all over again. So what we like to do is figure out what that dollar need is for year 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, add them up, and you get a number. But we got a 5-year time horizon on it. It'd be foolish for us to not get any sort of return. So we use a very, very modest return, and it's very easy to figure out what the net present value of that amount is. Okay? So now, what have we done? If we're conservative in our growth rate there, what we've done is we basically have locked in with a high degree of certainty the income need for the next 10 years. Okay? Especially if we're taking into account inflation, especially if we're taking into account taxes, and we try to factor everything else that possibly go in there, a purchase of a home or something like that. Everything else can go over here into this long-term growth box. All right? There, you actually can be a little bit more aggressive. And the reason why you can be a little bit more aggressive is because when you look at the total portfolio and the fact that you have your income stream set up for 10 years, you're in really good shape. You can be more aggressive and still overall not be taking too much risk for where you are.
Yep.
Okay? The thing that's really interesting about that inside of there, and the reason why it makes so much sense to me is every year you can keep score. Are we ahead? Are we behind? Either way, we can make adjustments. And if over here in the long-term growth box, over 10 years, if we end up in year 8 being way ahead of schedule, we can then stop, turn around, reshuffle the boxes, and start funding years 11, years 12, year 13. Never like to stop on 13, year 14, right? Yep. And so it gives you a lot of things in here. Now, there's one important point on this. This strategy is not putting you on a budget. If something pops up, we can evaluate what happens and how far ahead or behind we are in another box, and we can make adjustments. So we're not putting you on a budget. The other thing is that to go back and answer the A.G.E approach, is it adaptable? 100%. If you're down or you're a little bit behind, you can adjust the risk where appropriate to help get you back on track. If you are ahead, you can also adjust. Does it allow for growth? 100%. We have the lion's share in theory, or a significant amount over here that is nothing but focused on growth. And oh yeah, by the way, it's a long-term vision, 10 years. Does it ensure that the funds are available? It does, because we got our first 5 years locked down in investments that have guarantees, and we can keep track for years 6 through 10. Are we ahead or behind, and we can make adjustments.
There's two things I really like about that strategy. One, the flexibility of it. Like you said, it's not putting a client on a budget, but it does allow for the flexibility of the unknowns of life. When things happen, whether it be a positive thing or a negative thing, there are choices and there's availability of funds to take from to allow for that flexibility for life. Sure. The other side that I really like is the security of it, knowing that we can have periods where the market goes a little bit crazy, and that doesn't affect the cash flow that a client is able to take. Their standard of living does not have to adjust. They don't have to decrease the withdrawals during a down year. They have that security and peace of mind that their funds are there despite what's happening in a strange period in the market. We've got time to ride that out. And over time, the portfolio still is growing.
You go through life working really, really hard. You've amassed this wealth. How do you create that income stream from it and have the freedom that you want because you've worked this hard? This gets you, you don't have to be concerned about what's happening every single day in the market. Yeah, if XYZ investment is, or XYZ company is going out of business, you don't want to own them. That's not what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that you're not making adjustments in the portfolio given the information that you have with regard to the economy and everything else, right? But you have this freedom. And getting it set up the right way gives you flexibility, right? And gives you peace of mind to do the things that you really want to do and not have to worry about it.
Absolutely. And to reiterate what you said, it's not a set it and forget it type strategy, but it does allow for the freedom to live your life while your advisor, your partner in your investments is helping manage and making the changes as needed, but allowing you that flexibility and freedom, our favorite phrase, to go live life and do the things you enjoy the most.
You know, the other thing of it is that we tend to keep score with dollar signs, right? How much money do we have? We tend to go through to keep score. Sometimes when we're looking at our money and our relationship to money, we forget what the real purpose of it is, right? It's all to fund the goals in life that we have. We can't be foolish about it. We want to fund those goals. Having $1 million, what does that mean? Well, it means freedom. Stick on that phrase. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means the ability that if I want to go out to dinner, I can go out to dinner. Now, let's be real clear, $1 million, depending on what you're spending on the rest of life, may not be enough. But if you think about the money, if your relationship with money is what are the outcomes that it's going to provide me, whether that's experience with family or grandkids, or maybe it's just you and a spouse being able to travel, or maybe it's philanthropy, maybe it's getting engaged in philanthropic things. Maybe it's setting that next generation up for success, right? That's what the money is for. It's for the result, right? And this type of plan, setting up and using the age approach, gets you there.
Absolutely. We covered a lot today.
Yeah, and I think we've touched about on this in some other podcasts, but I really think that it's really valuable because that 4% rule, and I know there are a lot of people that even today are doing their retirement planning based off of a 4% rule, and that's probably destined for failure. With that, Karen, thank you all very much for joining us for this week's Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. We hope to see you next week.
See you next time.
The information contained herein is intended to be used for educational purposes only and is not exhaustive. Diversification and/or any strategy that may be discussed does not guarantee against investable losses, but are intended to help manage risk and return. If applicable, historical discussions and/or opinions are not predictive of future events. The content is presented in good faith and has been drawn from sources believable to be reliable. The content is not intended to be legal, tax, or financial advice. Please consult a legal, tax, or financial professional for information specific to your individual situation.
This work is powered by Concenture Wealth Management, registered representative of Sanctuary Securities, Inc., an investment advisor of Sanctuary Advisors, LLC. Securities offered through Sanctuary Securities, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through Sanctuary Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Concenture Wealth Management is a DBA of Sanctuary Securities, Inc. and Sanctuary Advisors, LLC.